I believe the girl is to be the mother.
Mother of what?
It's the mark of the devil.
It's not real. 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 What's not real? Who said that?
The First Omen is a new horror film that hit theaters this weekend, and of course it is a prequel to the 1976 film The Omen, and horror movies have been doing a lot of that lately, where they either do a prequel movie or they do a legacy sequel. This went the route of the prequel movie to sort of reinvent that franchise, and who knows, if this does really well, we may very well get a legacy sequel to the First Omen movie down the line. It'll be the first time that happened, but it's kind of a cool idea. With that said, I had never seen any of the Omen films before watching this movie, and I am interested now in watching The Omen from 1976 after I've seen The First Omen. I feel like there was enough there to pique my interest. So I went into this movie pretty blind, not knowing what was going to happen, and I ended up getting a pretty run-of-the-mill religious horror film. Not something I hadn't seen before, but we'll dive into that in my review. The movie is directed by Arkasha Stevenson, and it stars Nell Tiger Free as Margaret, and Margaret is a girl who was an orphan at a young age, was raised with the church's help, and with guidance from her priest decides she's going to move to Rome and take her vows to become a nun. But when she gets there, an evil scheme to birth the Antichrist is revealed to her. I feel like I can say all of that because, I mean, if you know anything about The Omen, listen, I didn't even see The Omen, and I knew that it was about the Antichrist being born. So like I said, this movie's a prequel to that original Omen movie, so you're going to see the events that lead up to that movie. With all that said, if that sounds like an interesting time at the theater, maybe you're a big Omen fan, then this movie's probably for you. You should go check this out on the biggest screen possible. With that said, let's get into my positives and some of my negatives. The first positive I have for this movie is going to be how creepy it felt. Like, the movie opens with a very ominous, creepy scene that was probably my favorite scene in the entire movie, as it would turn out. I didn't know that at the time, but it was a good introduction to the movie. I thought, oh, if we can keep this pace of sort of creepiness, then maybe we can enjoy it. And it's just a conversation between two priests, and one priest is sort of confessing to the other priest some things that he has done, and then some tragedy strikes. I'll leave it at that. My point is that that scene was enough to sort of set the events of the movie in motion to the point where it got you invested, and I liked the creepiness of that scene. There's also a few well-placed jump scares in this movie. One in particular that really worked for me was Margaret is in her hotel room because she's not living at the convent because she hasn't taken her vows yet. So she's in her hotel room and she hangs up her nun outfit behind her and she's praying. And as the camera turns, the nun outfit seems to be possessed, or maybe even there's a creepy nun behind her. And just the way they play with the camera in that scene, the way they spin around the room and then eventually reveal a jump scare to you really worked for me. Even though I was looking at it in the moment, because this wasn't a jump scare ruined by one of the trailers, or it wasn't something I had seen recently, that jump scare was effective. And again, it just worked to set the tone for this movie because that scene as well takes place early on. I really liked those things about this movie. Again, I thought the tone was really good and some of the creepiness and jump scares were very effective toward the beginning. And that'll lead me to my other positive in this movie, which would be the great horror visuals. Because as this movie is happening, Margaret is seeing visions. Sometimes she's watching a birth of a child, but she sees the birth of something a lot more demonic. And it's pretty gory at times, it's pretty horrific at times, but I really like how much they played with Margaret's sanity. And then you, the viewer, never really knew what you were watching either. Were you watching things in Margaret's head? Was she actually seeing these horrific things? Or was she crazy? And so I like that the movie played with her, but in turn was able to play with you, the audience. The movie was able to sort of stretch the imagination of the viewer because you were seeing things through the eyes of someone whose imagination was also being stretched in the movie. So again, the tone worked for me. I liked the creepiness of this movie. I also really liked some of the gory horror visuals that they gave you because some of them really worked. And this movie deals with some really hard material to get through. I mean, it's a woman who's being impregnated by a beast. Her face is masked so that she can't really see through it, but you could see a shadow above her of this beast that is trying to impregnate her with the Antichrist. And that is hard material to get through as a viewer, and it just sits with you. So again, the horror visuals in this movie really worked for me too. And that'll lead me to my negatives. And unfortunately, my first negative for this movie is the reveal of that evil sort of demonic presence that is trying to get her pregnant. They reveal it for a moment at the end, and it looks like a dog. And it's weird because throughout the movie, you're given these visions of what this thing looks like and how disgusting and grotesque it is because you're seeing things through Margaret. And then when you actually see the thing, it's like, oh, well, that wasn't scary. And that leads me to a big issue that I have with a lot of horror movies is that when there's a monster element to the movie and that monster is revealed 9 times out of 10, it takes any of the creepiness away. Thankfully, it's one of the last shots of this movie because you see these flames, and as the flames pass and the cloud of smoke sort of passes as well, you get a shot of this dog-like animal, and it just kind of looks like a dog. Now, I've only seen it once, and it was one time in the theater, and it's a pretty fast scene, so maybe on rewatch at home, I can pause it at that time, get a better glimpse of it. Maybe it looks a little more horrifying. In the moment, though, it just looked like a dog, and I was like, oh, well, I took the horror element out of that completely. And now, when I go back to watch this movie, I'll be like, yeah, it's just a dog. It's gross still, but it's not very effective anymore. And that'll lead me to my other negative for this movie, and that it's pretty predictable and forgettable at the same time. Predictable in the fact that once you get about to the halfway point of this movie, you can exactly see where it's going. To me, the big reveal of this movie that has to do with the character of Margaret and this younger girl that's at the orphanage as well, and how they are linked, I won't spoil it here, but that reveal wasn't really a reveal to me. I figured that out several scenes before the characters in the movie figured it out, and you, the audience member, were supposed to just like, oh, I can't believe that's what's going on. But I called that. Now, again, I watch a lot of horror movies, a lot of religious horror movies, so maybe it's just something I was anticipating. And again, I know this is a prequel movie leading into a movie that's very famously known, but I'd never seen The Omen, so I was just sort of going along for the ride in this movie, and I was still able to pinpoint this thing as it was going along. There was no twist or turn in the back half of this movie that really surprised me, and that was disappointing because the opening of this movie set up a lot of intrigue, a lot of mystery, like, ooh, what's going on at that convent? But then once you get there, it's kind of like, okay, that person's evil, that person's evil, I bet that person's evil too, even though they don't seem like they're very... I'm not trying to spoil things here. My point is that it's very predictable. And then on the forgettable end of things, this is a horror movie that I don't know if I'd go back to anytime soon because, again, it is a prequel movie. I am interested in watching The Omen from 1976 now, so in that way, it's a little bit memorable. But once I see that movie, I don't know if I'll go back to The First Omen because I've seen that story now. And there wasn't enough in the positives for this movie to really bring me back, to really get me excited to watch this movie again. And at the end of the day, if The Omen is as good as everyone says it is from 1976, and I watch that movie, I doubt I'll be like, oh, gotta watch the prequel before I watch this movie again. I just doubt that'll happen because there seemed to not be enough substance in that movie to make it memorable. So the movie just ended up being forgettable for me. And that'll lead me to my final negative for this movie, and that is the women's reproductive rights that are brought up in this movie. Because in this movie, like I said earlier, there's some graphic things that happen to this woman, or to multiple women within this movie, between the women and this beast, and that's a hard subject to get into. However, the movie Immaculate did it a couple of weeks ago, and I think they handled it a lot better. I think they explained it away a lot better. This movie went for more shock horror in some of those scenes, whereas Immaculate waited on that shock horror till the very end, and then it did get very graphic, it did get very violent, but you were on the side of her at that point in the movie, whereas in this movie, you weren't not on the side of her, but you were kind of like, let's see how this thing plays out. I kind of want to see where it goes now. And you also know that it's leading into the Omens. That might have something to do with it as well. But I think that if you were trying to send a message about women's reproductive rights, which I feel like this movie and Immaculate were doing, I think Immaculate did it that much better. I think they handled it that much better. I could be wrong. I'm a man. Maybe it spoke to me in a different way. Maybe it'll speak to women or other people in a different way. And if you feel differently, let me know in the comment section down below. But for me, again, the effectiveness of that women's reproductive rights that this movie sort of touched on in this movie, I think was done better in the movie Immaculate. I think they handled that material much better and opened up a broader conversation. Whereas this movie just kind of feels like a run-of-the-mill horror movie. And here's the thing, not every movie needs to have a message for the public. Some movies can just be horror movies and they can be for fun. And I'm fine with that. But because that's what this conversation has become about it online, I just think Immaculate did it better. Overall, I will say that if you're into the Omen movies, I think you'll enjoy this movie. I will say that if you're a big horror fan, you like that creepy feeling, then you should probably check out this movie. But overall, if I lined up Immaculate versus The First Omen, which deal with very similar material, I mean very similar material, I would pick Immaculate 9 times out of 10. I think it is the better of the two movies, but that's just my opinion because that's my review for The First Omen. Guys, have you seen The First Omen yet? If you have, let me know in the comment section down below. Let me know what you're thinking about it, if you agree or disagree with me on some of my positives or negatives. Maybe you got a completely different experience out of the movie, and that's totally fine because movies are supposed to give us all a little bit different of an experience, and that's what I love about movies. With that said though, guys, if you like this video and you want to watch more, don't forget to hit the like button because it helps the video, it helps the channel, and it helps me right here. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Alright guys, we got to the end of my The First Omen review. I don't know why I said it like that, but I did. Hey guys, if this is the first time you're finding my channel, I would love for you to hit that subscribe button, whether you like movie reviews, Blu-ray talk, or even sometimes movie news updates. Yeah, if something strikes me the right way and I want to talk about it that's in the news of movies, I talk about it on this channel. With that said though guys, if you want to check out more of the content on my channel, well, I've got all of my horror movie reviews right there, and I've got all of my 2024 movie reviews right there.